Finally, the Heart of the Crystal Gems, Stephen Baum, comes to a conclusion, and what a conclusion it was. This episode was explosive, it was exciting, and it felt like a proper convergence of plotlines which have been in the works for a very long time now. And regardless of how poorly I feel that some of those plotlines were handled at certain points in their development, I can understand why the crew would have wanted to resolve those plotlines here, because this is a great conclusion to those plotlines. Now, I do have a couple of issues with this episode, but we'll get to that towards the end. Instead, let's talk very briefly about this episode, though I am going to kind of rush through this a little more than usual. You guys may have picked up by now that I don't like describing comedy scenes in detail, and I don't like describing action scenes in detail. I'll tell you why an action scene works, but I prefer not to just give you a blow-by-blow of the scene itself in my recaps. Because I honestly feel that comedy scenes and action scenes are the only two scenes that you absolutely have to see to really understand why they work. And unfortunately, most of this episode was just a big action scene, so I'm going to be a little light in my recap, instead focusing on just some of the big moments during those action sequences. But I did say that most of this episode is an action sequence, and that's because it starts out as something else, of course, Ruby and Sapphire's wedding, which is just as adorable as you might have expected. Though they ended up going with a together breakfast cake rather than the cool dolphin cake that I wanted to see really bad, which kind of bummed me out. The episode opens up with everybody getting ready for the wedding, setting up for the wedding, while Stephen sings a song about how for just this one day he wants to think only about love. He doesn't want to be distracted by any world-ending catastrophes. Oh boy, that sucks for him. And it is a fantastic song. Zach really brought it for this musical number. It was excellent. And set the stage perfectly for the wedding itself, which was short and sweet, but with sweet being the operative word. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the first lesbian wedding and the first lesbian kiss, because Ruby and Sapphire do finally kiss in the history of animated television, which makes this a landmark as well as a fantastic scene. Then finally the two of them fuse back into Garnet. We get to see some of their wedding reception, and the whole town stays to party with them, so the whole town is there when the diamonds arrive. Blue and yellow diamonds ships break through the atmosphere and fly overhead. But because everyone's there, Nanifwa is able to go into action right away, directing people to designated shelters and taking emergency precautions. But blue and yellow don't go for Beach City. They don't go for the crystal gems. Instead, flying past the town and going directly for the cluster, either attempting to remove it from the earth so that they can take it, or assuming that it hasn't awoken yet and trying to wake it up early, because as far as I remember, they've never been informed that it was in a bubble, so they can't be trying to unbubble it. But they still do. The cluster comes unbubbled, despite Stephen's best efforts to try to calm it back into its resting state. But, and this is the mistake that the diamonds made in creating the cluster from a bunch of broken crystal gems. The cluster recognizes that the Earth is in danger, that the diamonds are here, and they're doing direct damage to the planet, and so is able to form into a version of its final body, that being a large arm and hand, which is small enough that it doesn't destroy the Earth. And while I do have some issues with the way this is presented in the scene, this means that the cluster, a whole bunch of past crystal gems, is available during this fight to help protect the planet. It engages Yellow Diamond's ship directly, leaving just Blue Diamond for the crystal gems to deal with. And she is pissed off enough that she comes out to deal with them in person. And while the crystal gems might have been strong enough to fight her directly, we never really get to find out, because she immediately starts using her ability to project her emotions onto others to cripple them with grief. Only Connie is unaffected, since she's a human and not a gem, but alone she's not really able to make any difference. It isn't until a new contender arrives that things start to turn around. Lapis Lazuli descends from space, having finally made her decision. She probably saw the diamond ships on their way to Earth from her perch on the moon, and finally made the choice to come back to her new home and side with her friends. She descends from space with the barn in tow and throws the entire thing at Blue Diamond, declares herself a crystal gem, and then engages Blue Diamond in direct combat alongside her fellows. Thanks to her immense power, they're actually able to make some real headway. Not only that, but Lapis gets one of the most badass scenes in the show's history that I'm not going to spoil for you, during which we learn that she can resist Blue Diamond's emotional projection ability. And so there's a fight with one of the diamonds, and we get to gauge just how strong one of the diamonds is, which honestly is brilliant, narratively speaking. Awakening the cluster, giving it the ability to fight one of the diamonds directly all on its own, allowed both diamonds to be here for the fight, but split their focus early on so that we could see just how strong one of them is, and gauge just how strong an individual diamond might be. But eventually, when the cluster is victorious and manages to destroy both Yellow and Blue's ships, it starts to lose control and has to rebubble itself. And destroying the two ships did not destroy Blue and Yellow themselves. And so now the crystal gems have to deal with both of them at the same time, which is of course a bit more difficult, especially when Yellow Diamond has the ability to destabilize the form of any gem with little more than a gesture. Lapis and Peridot are both poofed. And while it's possible that they were only poofed to show that the situation was serious, them being the two gems who were least important to this arc overall, I honestly think that that purpose could have been served better if someone like Bismuth had been poofed. Like, imagine Yellow Diamond shows up and pretty much immediately poofs both Lapis and Bismuth. As cool as Peridot is, that shows even more that the situation is serious. So I think this, coupled with the fact that Lapis has finally admitted that she is a crystal gem, is some obvious telegraphing that the two of them are going to reform with crystal gem stars on their outfits. Finally, Yellow Diamond becoming involved in the fight, though, culminates in Steven being knocked unconscious, which knocks him into the dreamwalking dimension that he sometimes enters to communicate with people mentally. He sees something of a dreamscape version of the battle and is able to, in a limited way, communicate with each of the people involved. He has a limited capacity to hear some of their thoughts, as well as to share his thoughts with them, so he encourages each of the crystal gems in turn, and then makes his way to the diamonds, so that he can try to convince them that he is, at the very least, Pink Diamond's legacy, and ask them to talk things out with him rather than keep trying to kill him and his friends, because that would be the preferable option, really. And he does get through to them. He does manage to show them that he has Pink Diamond's gem, which causes them to stop fighting and even show concern in whether or not he will wake up. In fact, the ending shots of this episode, which are only possible because Steven manages to pull this off, are some of the most surreal in the series so far. I don't really know what to say about this episode. There's just so much to talk about. I guess I'll start with the criticisms. This episode does feel a bit rushed, and the conclusions to all these various plot threads do feel a little pat and anticlimactic in places. But honestly, this is pretty much how I expected them to be resolved. Like, not these specific events, but this format, if that makes any sense. Even back when these 22-minute specials were split between two episodes, like Mirror Gem, Ocean Gem, and The Return Jailbreak. The crew has never liked expanding a specific plot over more than 22 minutes time. They've been building up to this, so they've devoted much more than 22 minutes time to this story. But this specific plot, this specific moment in the story, was never going to take place over more than 22 minutes. And the fact that it feels rushed because of that just proves how complicated these storylines were. And even if it did feel rushed, it's not as if it wasn't satisfying. Like I said back in Can't Go Back, that I was getting tired of Lapis's emo-ness, for lack of a better term. But seeing how it was resolved here, I can get over that, because this was a satisfying resolution to that. And as pat as the resolution with the diamonds, or at least this stage of the resolution, because obviously their worldviews are still very different from the Crystal Gems' worldviews, so this isn't over completely, but what resolution we've gotten up to this point might have felt kind of pat and anticlimactic. But I can still understand why this happened. It still makes sense that this happened. When Steven was listening to the Diamond's thoughts, and we could hear their thoughts likewise, we learned that they have real regret over not listening to Pink Diamond back when she told them that she needed to stop colonizing this planet. That they each blame themselves for different aspects of her failure. And while their regret does obviously stem from the fact that she was, from their perspective, correct, and this rose quartz was dangerous enough to destroy her. Regret is regret, and when they learn that she's still alive, they are of course ecstatic. And of course they're going to stop fighting the person that they perceive might be her. It makes perfect sense, and was an excellent use of this ability of Steven's that's been building up for multiple seasons now. And I am totally not just saying that because I theorized that almost this exact thing would happen not too long ago. That has absolutely nothing to do with why I like this episode so much. Also, were the diamonds pearls on their ships? Because if so, are we sure that they survived this? I'm kind of worried about them. The fight between the crystal gems and the diamonds, as short as it was satisfying. Callbacks to previous episodes, the Together Breakfast, even a bit of Stronger Than You playing when Garnet confronts Blue Diamond, getting to see Yellow Diamond interact with Peridot again, getting to see Garnet interact with Blue Diamond again, were all very satisfying things. Things which would not have been as satisfying if the lore of this show wasn't as strong as it is. But I think the moment in this episode that made it worth it the most, aside from Garnet's wedding and aside from Lapis descending from space with a barn in tow, which I cannot get over how spectacular that was getting to see all of the crystal gems stand together against a common foe again. This may be a very different group of crystal gems than existed during the war, but it's still very satisfying to see the whole group together. And before I forget, I do want to briefly praise the animation in this episode. It was just really good in general, but then particular attention was paid to the details on the characters during the fight scenes, making them really pop. And perhaps what's most interesting about this episode from a narrative standpoint is that this felt like it could have been a series finale, and yet we know that it's not. Season 6 has been in the works for a long time now, evidenced by the fact that there are multiple plot threads still left unresolved. We have obviously not seen the last of Sadie's band, Lars and the Off-Colors are still off in space somewhere on their way to Earth, and we still haven't met White Diamond. Though I do expect the events of this episode and the episodes which immediately follow it to finally be what brings her into the show, but again, that's something I'll talk about in another video. I'm trying to come up with more stuff to say, stuff that I need to say to sell this episode, to explain why this episode is so great, but I don't really think there is anything else. Just go experience this episode for yourself. If for some reason you're here and you haven't experienced this episode for yourself yet, go experience it for yourself. It feels like such a celebration of this show as it exists up to this point, and that's something that I can't do justice to in words. You just have to experience it for yourself. But as per usual, I'd like to know, what do you guys think of this episode if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below or over on my Discord. Link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.